Ever think about life without smartphones? Weird, right? It's almost impossible to imagine our daily routines without them. From the moment we wake up to the time we go to bed, these devices are our constant companions. Like, what would our pockets even hold? We'd have to bring back fanny packs, or maybe those tiny purses from the 90s. Remember those? They were all the rage back then. Or maybe those tiny purses from the 90s. They were small, but they carried all the essentials. Jokes aside, picturing a world without those pocket computers is actually kind of mind-blowing. No constant notifications, no doom scrolling before bed. Imagine the peace of mind we'd have. Just life, unfolding at a slightly slower pace. More time to enjoy the little things, like a walk in the park or a quiet moment in the countryside. Imagine this. You're meeting a friend, but they're late. No quick text to check in. You just wait. No quick text to check in. You just wait. And in that waiting, you might find a moment of reflection or even a new connection. And maybe, just maybe, you strike up a conversation with a stranger. Who knows what interesting stories or new friendships could come from that? Or you actually look around and appreciate the world around you. Crazy, right? The colors, the sounds, the people. Everything becomes more vivid. Let's dive into this alternate reality. A world where our attention isn't constantly divided by screens. A world without the glow of smartphones. Where we look up at the sky more often and maybe even notice the stars. A world where we actually had to remember phone numbers. Remember those days? Yeah, me neither. But it was a time when our brains were our primary storage devices. We wrote things down, read more books, and had face-to-face conversations. It was a different kind of connectedness, one that was perhaps more genuine and heartfelt. We had more time for hobbies, for creativity, for simply being in the moment. Imagine that. Before cell phones, time was a mystery, literally. You couldn't just glance at your phone to check the time or send a quick text to let someone know you were running late. Time was more fluid and plans were more flexible, often leading to a lot of waiting and wondering. Meeting someone? Around 2 p.m. could mean anything from 1:45 to 3. You had to rely on your memory and hope that your friend remembered the same time. If you arrived early, you waited. If you were late, you hoped they were still there. And if your friend was late, tough luck. No way to find out why. You just had to wait and hope everything was okay. The anxiety of not knowing could be overwhelming, but it was part of the experience. Remember payphones? Those clunky things that ate your quarters? They were lifelines back then. You had to carry change with you at all times, just in case you needed to make a call. Finding a working payphone was sometimes a challenge in itself. Needed to call your parents from school? Payphone. Date running late? Payphone. It was the only way to communicate when you were out and about. You had to memorize phone numbers or carry a little address book with you. Major crisis? You guessed it, payphone. In emergencies, finding a payphone quickly was crucial. You'd see people frantically searching for one, hoping it wasn't already in use. But here's the thing. Life was simpler. We talked more face-to-face. We wrote letters. Conversations were more meaningful because they were in person. You couldn't hide behind a screen or send a quick emoji. We actually listened to each other. Well, sometimes. There was a certain charm in waiting for a letter to arrive or meeting someone in person to catch up. It made interactions more special. There's something to be said for that kind of connection, don't you think? The bonds we formed were stronger because we invested time and effort into our relationships. It was a different world, but one with its own unique beauty. Getting lost was a rite of passage. Forget Google Maps. We had paper maps the size of tablecloths that never seemed to fold right. Road trips were an adventure. You'd stop at gas stations, ask for directions, and end up discovering hidden gems you never knew existed. Sure, sometimes you'd get hopelessly lost, but hey, that's part of the fun, right? And let's not forget the sense of accomplishment when you finally reached your destination. It was like conquering Mount Everest, except with fewer Sherpas and more complaining from the back seat. Remember snail mail? That magical time when you'd wait weeks for a letter, every word cherished like a precious gem? Long-distance relationships were a whole different ballgame. Phone calls were expensive, letters were slow, you had to get creative. Mixtapes, anyone? Care packages filled with snacks and inside jokes? Absence really did make the heart grow fonder, or at least more patient. Today, we can text anyone, anywhere, instantly. It's amazing. But maybe, just maybe, some things are worth waiting for. Section 5. The Encyclopedia Britannica's reign supreme. Accessing information in the not-so-old days. Remember libraries? Those dusty old buildings filled with, actual books? They were our Google back in the day. Need to research a school project? Library. Want to learn how to bake a cake? Library. Curious about the meaning of life? You guessed it, library. And those encyclopedias. Massive volumes filled with knowledge on every subject imaginable. Sure, they weren't always up to date, but they had a certain charm, didn't they? The smell of old paper, the weight of history in your hands. It was an experience. Section 6. A quiet coffee shop. The joy of undivided attention. Remember the days when you could go to a coffee shop and actually, enjoy your coffee? No endless scrolling on Instagram. No frantic emails to answer. Just you, your latte, and maybe a good book. Conversations were deeper. We were more present. We actually looked at each other when we talked. Imagine that. Don't get me wrong, smartphones are amazing tools. But sometimes, it's good to disconnect, to put down the phone and connect with the world around us. But what if it's an emergency? Imagine being stranded in the middle of nowhere with no cell phone in sight. Public phones and the art of resourcefulness. These booths were once lifelines, scattered across cities and towns. Okay, so maybe not everything was better before cell phones. Emergencies were trickier. You had to rely on these booths, and sometimes they were out of order or occupied. No calling for help from anywhere. You had to physically find a phone and hope it was functional. You had to find a public phone and hope it worked and had enough quarters. Carrying change was a necessity. But here's the thing, we learned to be resourceful. We adapted to the limitations and found ways to make it work. We looked out for each other. We knew our neighbors. Communities were tighter knit, and people were more willing to lend a hand. And maybe, just maybe, we were a little bit more aware of our surroundings. We also planned ahead. Going on a hike? You'd make sure to inform someone about your plans. Tell someone where you're going and when you'll be back. It was a common practice to ensure safety. Driving alone at night? Make sure your car is in good shape. Check the engine, fill the tires with air, and ensure you have enough fuel. It was a different time, for sure. A time when resourcefulness and community were key. We may have had fewer conveniences, but we made up for it with ingenuity and a strong sense of togetherness. Remember fax machines? Those clunky contraptions that sounded like dying cats? They were the height of business technology back then. Deals were made with handshakes. Contracts were sent by snail mail, or courier if you were feeling fancy. Meetings were face-to-face, not on Zoom. It was a slower pace, but it allowed for more thoughtful decision-making. And let's not forget the art of the handwritten note. A simple thank you card could go a long way in building relationships. It was personal. It was meaningful. It was civilized. So, what have we learned from this trip down memory lane? Well, for one thing, we survived without smartphones. The world didn't end. In fact, it was a pretty interesting place. Maybe, just maybe, there's something to be said for unplugging every now and then, for putting down the phone and connecting with the world around us, for rediscovering the lost arts of conversation, letter writing, and actually paying attention to the people we're with. So, what's next? Will we ever go back to a world without smartphones? Probably not. But maybe, just maybe, we can find a balance. A way to use technology to enhance our lives, not consume them. Maybe the future of connection isn't about staring at screens, but about experiencing the world around us in new and exciting ways. Holographic projections? Virtual reality experiences? The possibilities are endless. But whatever the future holds, one thing's for sure, it's going to be an interesting ride. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go charge my phone.